In this video, we'll discuss the features on ZAMEEN-A's face that point to metaphysical expression as well as a highly creative nature. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back for another face reading. Today we've got something a little bit different. So as all of you know, every week I read famous celebrities. So the reason I do that, one, my channel is in its infancy, and yes, it is a natural way to build my channel, get clicks, build the algorithm. You know, it's part of the game to a degree, but also celebrities' lives are on public display. It's easy to find information about them. So in terms of finding lifestyle rhythms and the celebrity in their face, very easy to do. However, what I've been wanting to do for quite some time is to read, quote unquote, regular everyday people who are not famous or not famous yet. And I think it's good to look at everyday people and not have the associations and the emotional charge that we have with celebrities. So moving forward, I'm going to be reading more people like this. Not every week, but I'm going to start throwing in regular everyday people, people I even know personally, and reading their faces because I think it's just a wider and better range in terms of education for face reading. So that's one. So I reached out to ZAMEEN-A here, and she's a performance artist. She is a violinist also. We follow each other on Instagram, and I reached out to her as a courtesy because she's a regular everyday person. I can actually get a hold of her. And I said, hey, do you mind if I use you as a case study of sorts for my face reading channel? She said, absolutely. She was very into it. Come to find out, she was already watching my YouTube videos, my face reading videos, and she had added me on Instagram because she found my description in the description box. So long story short, first and foremost, ZAMEEN-A, thank you for allowing me to read you and use your metal features as sort of a case study for the group here. So let's go ahead and jump in. She carries a lot of metal, okay? Again, for review, metal is big open spaces with not a lot of interruption, and there's also a shiny quality to the skin. There's sort of like a sheen to the skin. It relates to lung function. So big metal element themes means the person needs to have the metal element rhythms active in their life to be optimally functioning. So if we look at the core themes of metal, what we're looking at is creativity, femininity, divinity, the dynamics of children, all of that stuff, okay? Also art and beauty. So those things, the pursuit of beauty, looking for beauty, finding beauty in experience, finding beauty in life, really core to the metal element. So the other thing I've said is that when we talk about beauty, in face reading, any person can be found attractive in any of the 5 elements. There are people who are fire attractive, wood attractive, earth attractive for all of the elements. But classically, by definition, metal, if a person is good looking, if a person is found, kind of mainstream attractive, they're said to carry a lot of metal. So obviously here, ZAMEEN-A is very beautiful. She holds true to that. She holds a lot of metal. But there are some key things that you want to think about in relation to metal. Metal, if we think about the symbol of metal, okay, it's a mountain. So the mountain are these hard protrusions from the earth that are moving and scaling towards the heavens. That's a symbol for ascending towards divinity, about God and what makes things tick. It relates to the metaphysical. So when we see that, okay, the metal energy is moving towards the heavens. It relates to elevation. It's also cool, and it can also be a very lonely place. So if we think about Mount Everest, why do people climb Mount Everest? The answer from a lot of climbers is, well, because it's there. It's something to like conquer and to go through. And so climbing the mountain, scaling the mountain of high elevation is not for the faint of heart. It is a difficult place. It can be cold and bleak and very solitary and alone. And with the creative types, when we see that, a lot of times there's that creativity that's so expansive, they feel like nobody gets me. No one sees the world like I do because everything is so open and expansive. So the thing I say with people that carry a lot of metal, you've got to be careful not to get lonely or isolated or solitary in your pursuits because the metal element carries that. Just it naturally does. So the thing I want you to think about is the preceding and proceeding element in the 5-element wheel. So if you look at the 5-element wheel, earth comes before metal, and then after it is water. And those preceding and proceeding elements are very important in terms of how we regulate our life force. So with ZAMEEN-A, because she has so much metal, if she's feeling stagnant, or any person with a lot of metal, if they're feeling stagnant and they're feeling stuck, and they're getting stuck on that mountaintop, and they're feeling isolated and alone, and that metal energy takes over, they can, 2 ways, drain that out or build up. So if you want to drain the energy out and kind of move it out, right? Say the person is feeling isolated and alone, you've got to move into those water metrics, philosophy, reading, taking time for yourself, tranquility, stillness, being quiet. That's very important, kind of how you like drain the energy out of metal to make things operate a bit better in your life. Now, if a person is feeling deficient and run down, they're going to want to go to the preceding element, and that is the earth element, and that relates to being generous. It relates to house and home, quality nutrition, quality food. And so when you have a really dominant element, you got to pay attention to the element before and after and plug into those rhythms as a means to either nourish, to strengthen metal, or if the metal has become too strong and is running excess, you've got to drain it out. So those are kind of like the core themes I would be talking to her about this. Now, like I said, she was kind enough to provide some of her life metrics. So I'm going to put this up on the screen, the things she shared with me, if you can just see this list. Literature, poetry, philosophy, Vedic philosophy, writing, experimental and avant-garde art, health and wellness, nature being a huge value for her. We'll talk about that because she's got very big mountains and rivers. She's a musician. She's into cosmological symbolism. So if you were to put these things in a book, this is characteristically all metal, all of it. So I was like, well, here's the congruency. This is great. And what that points to me about her too is that the fact that she's even identified that she's into these things means she's quite literally living out the features she's carrying, which is like, bravo. It's like, good job. That's what you should be doing. And that's the nice part about face reading, is that even if ZAMEEN-A here was not familiar with the face reading and had never studied it, little did she know, or does she know that she's actually living the very thing her face carries, which a lot of us end up finding naturally. So that's very cool. That's very interesting. But let's go through and talk about the mountains and rivers a bit. When you have the mountains and rivers as a lens within face reading that relates to the ideal geography that we should live in, the landforms around us in the external world. So the rivers are the areas that contain moisture. The eyes, the nostrils, the mouth, and the ears. And if you're wondering, like, well, why ears? Ears accumulate earwax. So think like the fluid accumulates there. The bigger those features are, the larger bodies of water are needed for that person to feel fully recharged. But she's also got very big mountains, and the mountains relate to the bony protrusions on the face, the forehead, the cheekbones, the nose, and the jaw. Not the chin, though, okay? From this line down from the mouth to here, that's the chin, that's water, but the jaw, that's the mountains. So in her list of life metrics, she was like, nature's very important to me. I thought, well, that's great, because when you have big mountains and big rivers, this is a call to nature. You got to be in nature. And again, all humans benefit from nature dialogue. It's very, very important. But some people, right, face reading says if you are dominant in these things, it's going to be really more of a necessity for you to engage those things more consistently to feel at ease, right, to feel calm, to feel grounded and whatnot. Now, let's go on to her mouth. Very dominant, full, classical earth mouth. Now, like last week's video on Adriana Lima, earth and metal was dominant in her, also dominant in ZAMEEN-A here. The mouth relates to the five senses. It relates to expression. So the dialogue with the five senses, using all of the five senses, and being an artist, that's key. And then when you have the five senses, that relates to expression, right? That can be singing, that can be art, that can be a lot of things. And expression doesn't have to just be artistic expression, but on her face, given all this metal, it makes a lot of sense. So she's got a lot, to like work with. So you want to think in the big picture, like when we're carrying a lot of elements on the face, most of us usually are dominant in 2 or 3 elements. Occasionally you'll find the rare person who's balanced in all 5. But the thing is, you might think, well, I'm balanced in all 5. That's great. It's like, well, that means you have 5 wheelhouses that you have to explore to kind of keep your equilibrium. So for ZAMEEN-A, earth and metal are the big ones, which means like she's really got to focus on those and pay attention to those. So with a mouth like this too, you're looking at generosity. Generosity as a means to really, really engage that with vigor and with like precision, because if you have a large mouth, what that points to is that like you're designed to give, and giving can be, yes, like money to the homeless. Yes, it can be, volunteering your time at a soup kitchen, but it can also be art, right? Like expressing and giving part of what you create into the world. So she has these features, and like these are things that I would be talking to her about, and just say, make sure you're doing that, make sure you're engaging it. And then when I was also looking at her feature, I was also drawn to her forehead. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 3 sectors and then also the shape of her hairline, because I think there's some interesting things to talk about. She has, in her 3 sectors, she's got the allocations. Okay, for review, the 3 sectors are the ratios from the top of the hairline to the eyebrows, from the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. Upper one is mental, the middle is pragmatic, and the bottom one is emotional and instinctual. When you see from frontal view, okay, or from profile, the height of these ratios, that means in terms of decision making, the one that is the biggest is what you want to operate from first when making a decision. So what's interesting about her is that with the creative energy that comes with metal, her biggest section is the practical one, which I don't know what her relationship to practicality is. She might be like, oh, I like it, maybe I don't. But what her face says is, you've got all this metal, you got all this creativity, you got all this open, expansive, shiny energy moving everywhere. It looks like it's wired into her face that, like, you know, the powers that be were like, you're also going to need to be practical. So make sure what you're doing is practical, ZAMEEN-A. But in terms of decision making, practicality is the first lens she should go through when making a decision. The next one would be emotional and instinctual. And then the last one would be like the mental logistics. So something to think about for people when you're looking at the 3 sectors, ratios, okay? How do we decide? Now, with that shorter forehead, okay, her forehead and her hairline isn't low, but it's smaller out of the bunch, and it's also curved. So when it's shorter, what we can see sometimes is also kind of a rough childhood. Not always, but what it means is that, like, the childhood dynamics can sometimes feel like kind of isolated, alone, or difficult, more so than the average person. Again, I'd have to ask her if that's true or not, and if it's not, that's okay, but these are just the themes that I would be talking about. And then she's also got this curved hairline. That is what they call the mother's influence hairline. So when we see the rounded curved, that's more yin. When we see angular, widow's peak, or just straight lines, that's a bit more yang. The mother's influence relates to in relation to the karmic agreements you need to fulfill in this life. So the East says we all have karmic agreements that we have to fulfill in life, and the list is typically long. But in face reading, when you see that line, that curved line, it means assessing the relationship with the mother and the dynamics and all of the nitty-gritty that goes with the mom needs to be digested and worked on first. Now, she might have a great relationship with her mother. Maybe it's not so great. Who knows, right? That's not what this is about. It's more about saying, this go round, even if it's good or even if it's bad, focus on that. Digest the mother energy first, and that will kind of bridge you into the ever-flowing transformational cycle that we all need to go through in life to get through our things. But face reading says if it's big, like, deal with that first. Go to those things first. Now, when I was looking at her jawline, this is another big one, really cut and really chiseled. Those are strong wood metrics. That means drive, vigor. It relates to rage and anger. It relates to sex drive. It relates to physical activity. It relates to strength training and the movement and the engagement of the ligaments, the connective tissue. So in her life metrics, she said she was very, very like into working out. I thought that's great. With that jaw, you're going to need a lot of working out. So that's fantastic. Now, what technically didn't fit by definition for ZAMEEN-A was that she put on her life metrics introverted. And I'll be honest, I was like, that's interesting given how big her eyes are, which is usually open. It's an open door for a lot of things. Usually bigger eyes run extroverted, but the way I was kind of able to link this theory up is that metal, as expressive as it is, it can also be, like I said, being on the top of Mount Everest is probably a very lonely, like bleak and kind of dangerous place, but beautiful. The view you get at the top is amazing, and people go there for that spiritual upliftment. So given all of that, okay, introversion with that much metal in her themes and the creativity and the art and all of that, that introversion is kind of like being at the top of the mountain. That's where the person kind of recharges. That's their natural habitat, is also to be on the top of Everest a little bit. But the thing with metal, again, is it can be a cold, bleak place. So metal-featured people have to be careful about just not getting too isolated, not feeling too alone, and really making sure that they pay attention to those preceding and proceeding elements. Now, the last component I will talk about regarding her face was the public persona, natural face, and inner persona. So you can see her public persona is a bit more yang. It's a bit more angular. It's a bit more robust. So when we see that, that usually means the public dynamics of how you're received in the public are going to be seeing this face. That's the face that's kind of like guiding her in her public dynamics. So you can see it's a little more robust, robust and a bit more yang, but the inner persona is actually softer, wider set eyes as well, which means at an interpersonal level, that big, long view, big picture energy is pretty critical for like interpersonal dealings and relationships with close friends. That is key. And then the public persona has a bit more yang. And so you want to think the public persona is who people meet at first blush when they meet you. That's the face they meet. And when they get to know you, it's the face over here, that inner persona. And that's the dynamic. And the thing I always say about these public persona and inner persona faces is if you ever get a face reading from me and you look at these two faces, see which one you gravitate to more. If you have a good association with both, that's great. But a lot of times people are like, I don't like that face, or that one makes me uneasy. That's a call to action to integrate the shadow. Usually we like one side of our face more than the other. The idea is, though, these are two characters living in your life, and you have to know how to use them and when to use them. And in theory, they're always living, they're coexisting at the same, coexisting at the same time. So we can never fully get away from it, but these are things to be thinking about in the big picture. So that being said, ZAMEEN-A, thank you for letting me use you as a case study for the group here. And if any of you would like to follow ZAMEEN-A, check out her music. I'm going to put her information down in the description box, so you can go down there, give her a follow, check her out. And for the viewers, if there's anyone that's like a regular everyday person that you would like me to read either on social media or someone that you know, I will start compiling a list, and if I can get a hold of them and clear it with them, I will start doing these readings a bit more. So that's pretty much everything I've got for today regarding ZAMEEN-A. And if you guys have questions, please put them down below. Thanks a bunch.